Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Vote Her In. Vote Her In is a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and Rebecca Sive. Rebecca is the author of Vote Her In, Your Guide to Electing Our First Woman President, which we haven't quite done yet, but we got close, so the guide was helpful. And I am going to turn this over now to Rebecca, who will introduce our guest today. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly. It's great to see you. And I always say I'm thrilled to be here because I always am, because we just only talk to people we really want to talk to. I think that's the strategy. So tonight is included in that group of people. Our special guest tonight is Michelle Duster, who authored this amazing book about her great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells. And we're going to just talk as much as we can about the book and about the lessons we can learn from Ida B., who, just by way of preface, I wanted to say has been a hero of mine since I was in graduate school and studied the progressive era in Chicago politics, in which Ida B. was intimately and importantly involved. And then as I got involved and met various people in communities across the city, I got to meet Michelle's mother and her father as well. But her mom in particular and I were engaged in some of the same sort of causes and projects. One was the election of Chicago's first African-American mayor. Also was a women's project. So it's sort of like, oh, here's Michelle and she's written this book, and wow, mom taught her well. This is really great. So I wanted to just begin, because we're going to be serious here, as we always are. But I was thinking about the fact I've written about Ida B., not the way Michelle has, but I've written about her a few times, including in my book, Vote Her In. And I just wanted to read one statement from her from the time when she was the editor and publisher of something called the Memphis Free Speech, a newspaper. And it relates to what we've been experiencing in the United States right now, and what I know Michelle wants to talk with us about. And here's Ida B. I have no power to describe the feeling of horror that possessed every member of the race in Memphis when the truth dawned upon us that the protection of the law, which we had so long enjoyed, was no longer ours. All this had been destroyed in a night, and the barriers of the law had been thrown down, and the guardians of the public peace and confidence scoffed away into the shadows, and all authority given into the hands of the mob, and innocent men cut down as if they were brutes. And I read that just because we are all here still recovering, so to speak, from January 6th, trying to deal with the serious matters of racism in our society. And so thank you, Michelle, for being here to talk with us about the lessons your great-grandmother can share with us and teach us. So if we could begin by your talking with us a bit about how you came to the decision to really commit so much of your life to the study of her and the promotion of her, so that we would all know about her work and could follow in her footsteps. So welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Rebecca and Kelly, on Two Broads Talking Politics. So about my great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells, and before I start talking about her life, I'll just explain how I'm related to her. My great-grandmother had 4 children, and her youngest daughter was my grandmother on my father's side of the family. And so that's how I'm related to her. And so Rebecca mentioned my mother. My mother married into the family, but she has all of the same characteristics that actually I think a lot of the characteristics of Ida, which might be why some people think I'm related through my mother, but I'm related through my father. So as far as why I decided to write this book, as well as so many other things I've been doing to help people remember my great-grandmother, is I mean, she was an amazing woman, and she fought for freedom, justice, and equality pretty much her entire adult life, over 50 years. And we are still, dealing with some of the same issues, the same struggles in a different way than she did. I mean, she was born in 1862 in Holly Springs, Mississippi. She was born enslaved. And luckily, the Civil War ended in 1865 when she was only 3 years old. So she did come of age during Reconstruction, which gave her the opportunity to become educated and to see and witness her father becoming involved in politics, and to take advantage of the right to vote that was available after 1870. And so I just feel that the life that my great-grandmother led, the things that she fought for, the things that she stood for. I mean, she was a journalist, she was a civil rights activist, she was a suffragist. I mean, she was involved in so many, initiatives and struggles and movements that pushed the envelope and pushed this country to be all it was supposed to be on paper. And I think that people need to remember that the struggle didn't start in 1960. It started in 1870. It started in 1619. I mean, there's a whole, 400 years of struggle and progress. And I just feel that all of it needs to be remembered and celebrated.
Just to follow up for a minute, can you tell us why, in that context, from your own study of your great-grandmother, why she had this enormous courage, as you point out, as a young woman, to take care of her siblings, then to teach, then to become a civil rights activist in the middle of Memphis, right? And then in Chicago. Where do you think that came from?
Well, I can only surmise, based on my research, that she probably got, some of her courage and by modeling some of the things that, what I understand, her father was about. Not to minimize her mother, but she wrote about her father in more detail than she did about her mother. And so what I gathered was that he was very involved in politics. And he was not a politician. He would get involved in conversations about politics, had meetings that he attended. He would have his friends come over to the house. They actually lived in a house, and have Ida read the newspaper to her father's friends. And so she grew up in a politically engaged, socially engaged family, in an atmosphere of people taking advantage of the rights that came during Reconstruction, which is a part of our country's history that I really believe needs to be more well known, because it was a period, only a 12-year period of time, 1865 to 1877, when there was an enormous amount of progress among formerly enslaved people and the whole region of the country that had been affected by the freedom of formerly enslaved people. And so, just growing up in that environment, growing up having the right to become educated, I think my great-grandmother just grew up with a sense of possibility and a sense of what she deserved as a citizen of the United States. And so, most people say that children are kind of born with the temperament. So she probably had a little feistiness, upon birth. But then, the environment that she grew up in, I surmise, sort of nurtured that and gave her a sense of hope.
So systemic racism, of course, is still an enormous problem in this country. The modern day lynchings are police brutality and police killings. If we want to look at Ida B as a role model and want to figure out how we can take those characteristics that she had and develop them in ourselves so that we too can fight systemic racism, how would you sort of think about that? What are the things that we can do, the characteristics of hers, the perseverance that she had that we can develop more in order to follow in her footsteps?
Well, Kelly, one of the things that I included in my book, Ida B. the Queen, was an entire section that is about the the tactics that that my great-grandmother used in her fight for freedom, justice, and equality. And I included people who have worked since she passed away up until now, for the past 90 years, basically, who are working in her tradition. And so there are various ways. I mean, she was a journalist. And so obviously using writing as a tool to tell the truth and to uncover, facts and data and details about information is she used that as a tool to fight against a system. She also was involved in organizing actual organizations. I mean, she was one of the founders of the NAACP. She was one of the founders of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. She founded the Alpha Suffrage Club. She founded the Negro Fellowship Club. I mean, so she was about organizing, working with other people in order to affect change. She also literally spoke truth to power. I mean, she visited 2 sitting presidents in the White House to talk to directly, to the seat of power about impacting policy and laws. And there are other, tools that she used. And so, that was one of my goals with the book, was to sort of give people ideas and give examples of people who are working today or in recent history that people today can relate to give ideas on what people can do to make an impact, even something as small as making a button. Because I started the book with her being, visited by these FBI agents because she was wearing a button. She was passing out a button that said "Martyred Negro Soldiers" in honor of some soldiers who were killed in Houston. And so for that, she was considered to be criticizing the government. And so something just as small as making a button to make a statement are things that people can do today.
Or knitting those hats, as I know Kelly and a lot of her girlfriends did. Relating to this tactical question that Kelly asked, I wanted to follow up on one of the things I found so interesting in the book. And of course, it resonated with me personally because I try to be that way myself. But, the truth to power idea. And you talked about both what she did in that respect, walking into the Oval Office and saying exactly what she thought, or wherever she needed to be, talking to the white suffragists about, I'm not going to walk at the back, I'm going to wait, and I'm going to walk right in front along with you, right? And then, of course, pointing to Black Lives Matter. Do you think that as you were looking at her life and thinking about the lessons from it, do you have a perspective on how much of that sort of in your face, to a good end, you think is important for us to really keep front of mind?
I mean, I think that everybody has different personalities and different comfort zones and different skills. And so I don't really feel that one tactic is better than another. I just think it depends on what works for you. I think it all matters. And so, if people want to write letters to their representatives and have a letter writing campaign, or put together a petition, or have organize a boycott. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that people can get involved, and so my attitude is whatever you can do, to affect change is it matters. Everybody doesn't need to be in the streets. That doesn't work for everybody. Some people can't, for all a wide variety of reasons. They just literally cannot do that, but they can do other things. So, as long as people are doing something, even if it's, do a phone campaign, all kinds of different ways that people can, get involved and have some level of influence over our lives, our own lives, and their own lives.
And related to that, of course, she spent most of her life either in Mississippi or Chicago, right? And with a short time in New York. But both places are really troubled right now around the same set of issues that your great-grandmother was working on. And I'm wondering again here whether there are ideas when if you're one of our girlfriends who lives in Mississippi and looking at Cindy Hyde Smith, who posed with a Confederate cap on, right, and some sort of a gun, I forget what, or you're in Chicago and people are protesting, and rightly so, about police killings. Can you share with us, I mean, I know you can't guess what your great-grandmother would say or think, but can you extrapolate again from what you've read about how she would look at this kind of moment in time in these two places where she spent her life?
Well, again, I can only guess what my great-grandmother would think. But based on the fact that she spent 50 years of her life fighting, for basically first-class citizenship. I mean, we have to remember she was 58 years old when the 19th Amendment was passed, and she died when she was 68. So she really spent almost all of her life without having the right to vote. And she lived through Jim Crow laws, the first set of Jim Crow laws, right after Reconstruction ended. And so she lived through progress during Reconstruction, and then huge backlash, when everything went to states' rights. And states' rights don't tend to do very well for Black people. And so, I mean, I think that's important, as far as her sort of worldview. When you experience having, opportunity to do certain things, and then all of a sudden, rules are changed and you can't do them anymore, you're prohibited, then I believe, that creates an initiative to fight, because what you had before. And so, and another thing, I included a 400-year timeline in the book, because I think it's important for people to understand where my great-grandmother's life fits into this 400-year Black experience in this country, and also, like I said, after she passed away, what has continued on. And considering the fact that her lifespan from the Civil War to the Great Depression was a time of enormous change in this country, of recovering from a civil war, all the way to being part of a world war. I mean, just all the things that happened during that period of time. So my point is that there's a pattern in this country of progress and then backlash. And as I was working on this book, I started to really see the pattern. For me, I just saw a pattern about every 30 to 40 years. Maybe it's like every generation and a half. There's progress, and then all of a sudden people get mad and they want to go back to whatever the good old days are that their parents or grandparents reminisce about. And so, that's what's happening right now. There was progress. I feel in my own lifetime I saw progress, and now it seems like people are mad that certain people are progressing more than they really feel comfortable with. So it's kind of the same thing all over again.
So what is the significance of Ida B. Wells to today's feminism? She did a lot of things like running for office and registering voters, and the same kind of things that a lot of people in the feminist movement today do. Of course, it was a very different time, and this was long before anyone was talking about intersectional feminism. And she had, of course, the correct critiques of a lot of the feminism of her day. But how do we see her significance today, and what are things that she might differ from today's feminists on?
I mean, during my great-grandmother's time, there were just so many battles to fight. I mean, she was born into slavery. And so, I mean, as an African-American woman, there was an enormous amount of racism and, racial terror that was different than white women, experience. So being just on the basis of being women wasn't really the same kind of experience. And she made that clear, you know, in some of her writings where she talked about, especially when she took the ladies' car train, when she took the ladies' car when she was on the Chesapeake, Ohio and Southwestern Railroad, and she was asked to leave the ladies' car and go to the colored car. And so where's the allyship when it comes to women? And so in that situation, she's Black, you know, and not a woman. And one of the things that she wrote about, I mean, she ultimately sued the railroad. She initially won, and then only for it to be overturned a couple of years later. But one of the things that she wrote about that situation was how, as a Black woman, she did not receive the same level of respect as white women. And one of the things that I found to be pretty telling when it came to her attitude or level of disrespect that she felt was how Black women could ride the ladies' car if they were in a subservient role. So if they were nursing a white child, or if they were, I guess a maid to a white woman, then they were welcome on the ladies' car. But she, as a professional, educated teacher, was not welcome on the ladies' car. So then it's like, okay, so you're not only dealing with race and gender, but you're also dealing with class. And so there's so many layers to, you know, the experiences of Black women. And so as far as what she would think about today, basically, I think there's the same dynamics. You know, I just look at it as like the same play, but different actors, different costumes, different set design, but same play.
And related to that, I hadn't heard or read prior to reading your book about this poem in which the author calls your great-grandmother the Queen. And I'm wondering if you could share, I hope everyone here buys the book and underlines it and keeps it next to their bed. But in the meanwhile, could you just tell us that story? I think it's such an inspiring story and such an important one. And I'm so glad that you use it in the idea in the title.
Oh, thank you. Yes. So my great-grandmother founded the Alpha Suffrage Club in Chicago in early 1913, and then which was an all-Black suffrage club. And she traveled to Washington, D.C. with the Illinois delegation, which was predominantly white. And she had been working with these women in Chicago. She knew them. And so when they got to the parade in Washington, they were rehearsing, as people do before they are going to do the parade the night before. And the organizers of the parade made a request that the Black women march in the back of the parade to basically have a separate and equal parade, I guess. And long story short, my great-grandmother pretended to agree. But then the day of the parade, nobody could find her. And so ultimately what happened was that she walked alongside the parade and jumped out of the crowd and inserted herself into the Illinois delegation. So she integrated the parade.
And as I understand it, then was called the Queen for having done that. Do I have that story right?
Right. Well, this woman, Bettiola Fortson, wrote a poem about my great-grandmother called Queen of Our Race, which basically summarized, you know, the fact that my great-grandmother marched in the parade and represented, you know, her race in a very positive way. It was just a very uplifting and sort of a poem that was kind of, you know, an ode to her, you know. So I appreciated that, and it really made me realize that her contemporaries looked at her that way, and so it's not like us, you know, 100 years later, looking back at my great-grandmother in this way, but people of her time, you know, really had a lot of respect for her.
So I know Kelly wanted to ask a question about what you might be thinking about doing next, having written this book. And then I want to bring it back around to how we can honor your great-grandmother today and help you in the work you're doing. So,
Yeah.
Kelly.
So, where do you see this going from here? You know, what are you hoping to do with her story, or are you going to expand out from there? What are you going with this?
I mean, my goal is to. I'm not sure if I have enough time in my life to do all the things that I want to do, because I mean there's just so many untold stories, especially of women, and the more that I'm doing this kind of work, the more I'm realizing how much more work needs to be done. I mean, there's just such a level of erasure or omission of women in general. And then when you break it down by race, African American women it's just pathetic, the level of representation, and representation in every form of how people can become educated, textbooks, film representation, movies, exhibits, public history projects, everything you can think of on how people learn about our history. I just feel that either we're underrepresented or a lot of the messaging is skewed. It's not balanced. And so this is what I want to, in whatever way I can, my goal is to create work that helps people know that Black people in particular are multidimensional people. We have a lot of different lifestyles, a lot of different life experiences, and we have contributed a lot to this country besides, maybe 5 things that people give us credit for. And then broaden it out to all women. There's just so much information that is not very well known by the general public.
Mm-hmm. A couple of weeks ago, we talked with Julie Skelfo, who wrote the book, The Women Who Made New York. And it's a similar story. And, it was all kinds of women, from all different backgrounds and races and ethnicities. And Julie was saying the same thing. She realized how much more she could write and how she could go to other cities and try to uncover these stories. But I wanted to end on this a very positive note about 2 things. One is the first woman in the Oval Office is a woman with Black father, and a woman of color. And I think that that's, we can jump up and down 24/7 on that one. And one person in a place is never enough. But it is a sign of some positive steps we've all taken together. If we could finish, Michelle, in terms of us working together on these important matters of learning about women's history and women's accomplishments and all that, I wanted to ask you to just spend a minute in closing telling our listeners about the mural project you're doing in downtown Chicago that will commemorate Ida B. and how people can be a part of it.
Right. Well, I'm working with a group of women to have a suffrage mural created to honor Chicago area suffragists. It's a mural, so there will be 10 people that are included in the mural, which is still a very small number of women that we can actually honor. And so I'm really excited because it'll be the largest outdoor tribute to a suffragist in the city, and I just really hope that my goal is for that to be the beginning of paying tribute to women political trailblazers in the state of Illinois. I mean, I wish I had I don't know how many millions of dollars to fund I would love to have murals and monuments created around the state to commemorate every trailblazing, like the first woman in every position, political position in the country, this state, all the first. That's my dream, and I want to figure out a way to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we share your dream. I know we do. And if there are any women listening with $1 million loose coins in their pocket, send it Michelle's way so we can all work on this project. It sounds wonderful.
A statewide project to honor all of the women trailblazers of Illinois.
Right. Well, thank you, Michelle, so much for joining us. It's so uplifting to read such a wonderful book and remember some of these stories and learn things we didn't know, and to continue to forge ahead. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Rebecca and Kelly. Thank you to the two broads talking politics.
Thank you.